Drive through the middle of an Amish settlement in the middle of July and you'll see something that shouldn't be possible. Corn rows so clean you could eat off the dirt between them. Tomato fields with no dandelions, no thistle, no crabgrass creeping in from the edges. No sprayer has ever touched this ground. No drone, no tank, no drum of glyphosate sitting in a shed. And this isn't one tidy garden plot. Add up the farms across a single Amish community and that clean, weed-free ground can stretch past 1,000 acres, all handled the same way, all without a drop of chemical weed killer. So how does an entire community keep land that size clear of weeds using nothing but horses, hand tools and timing? Picture one farmer, a father in his 40s, out in a bean field before the sun's fully up, the air still cool enough that you can smell the dirt turning behind the cultivator's blades. His oldest kids are already headed for the barn to hitch the team, because in a house like this, weed season isn't a chore somebody assigns, it's just what July looks like. By the time most people are pouring their first cup of coffee, that family has already covered ground that would take a hired crew half a day to walk. Here's the thing people get wrong first. They picture one family out there hand-pulling weeds across 1,000 acres, and that math doesn't work. Nobody survives that. What actually happens is closer to an operating system than a chore list, and it starts long before a single weed ever breaks the surface. The first move happens the season before, and it doesn't look like weed control at all. It looks like a decision about what not to plant. Most English farms, the big commercial ones, run the same crop across huge blocks of land year after year, corn on corn on corn. Weeds figure that out fast. They adapt to whatever's growing and whatever's being sprayed on it, generation after generation, until you get the so-called super weeds that no amount of chemical seems to touch. Amish farms almost never give weeds that chance. A field that grew corn this year is just as likely to carry oats next year, then a hay crop, then back to corn again. Every rotation resets the board. The weeds that thrived under corn get starved out under hay. The ones that liked hay get buried under a dense stand of oats. By the time any single weed species figures out how to win, the crop underneath it has already changed. There's a version of this a lot of Amish farms take one step further, and it's less about switching crops and more about never leaving the soil bare at all. Instead of harvesting a field and letting it sit exposed to sun and wind for months, a farmer will drill in a cover crop right behind the harvester. Rye, clover, sometimes a mix of both, something that isn't meant to be sold, just meant to occupy the ground. That living carpet does two things a bare field can't. It shades out any weed seed trying to catch enough light to sprout, and when it's finally turned under the following spring, it breaks down into a thick mat that keeps smothering weeds for weeks while the actual cash crop gets established underneath it. A field that's never bare is a field where weeds never get an opening. Then comes the part that looks almost lazy from the road, but does more work than anything else on this list. Before a single seed goes in the ground, many Amish farmers will till the field early, just enough to trick the weed seeds sitting near the surface into sprouting. Then they wait. A week, sometimes two. Let that first flush of weeds come up, green and vulnerable. Then they run a shallow cultivator through and kill every one of them before the real crop is even planted. It's called a stale seedbed, and the idea is simple. You're not fighting weeds during the growing season. You're emptying the bank of weed seeds before the season even starts, so there's less waiting in ambush later. That's the setup. Now the actual season begins, and this is where the horses come in. Most Amish farms still run field equipment behind a team of horses or mules instead of a diesel tractor. And for weed control specifically, that's not nostalgia, it's practical. A horse-drawn cultivator can weave narrow, precise paths between rows of young corn or beans without compacting the soil the way a heavy tractor does. And a lighter touch on the soil means fewer weed seeds get churned up to the surface, where light can trigger them to sprout in the first place. The farmer walks or rides behind the team, steering a set of shallow blades that slice just under the surface, cutting weed roots without disturbing the crop beside them. On a lot of farms, this happens 2 or 3 times over a growing season, timed to catch weeds while they're still small enough that a shallow cut kills them outright. Timing is the whole game here, and it's a narrower window than most people assume. Wait too long and a weed's taproot has already gone deep enough that a shallow cultivator blade just prunes it instead of killing it, and 2 weeks later it's back like nothing happened. Go through too early and you risk dragging the cultivator across ground still soft enough to smother the crop seedlings you're trying to protect. So a farmer isn't just watching the calendar. He's out walking the rows most mornings, checking soil moisture with his hands, reading which weeds are an inch tall and which ones are already 3, deciding almost day by day whether today is the day the team goes out. It's less like running a machine on a schedule and more like reading a field the way a doctor reads a patient. But mechanical cultivation only gets you so close to the actual crop row. Get the blades too near the corn stalk or the tomato plant and you risk killing the thing you're trying to grow. That gap right around the base of each plant, that's the space no machine, no horse and no tool can fully close. That gap is where the people come in. Some operations close that same gap a different way, with mulch instead of hands, especially on smaller vegetable plots. Straw laid thick around tomato plants, wood chips packed in around berry bushes, sometimes a living mulch, a low-growing cover crop planted right alongside the cash crop, so there's simply no bare soil left for a weed seed to land on. It's slower to set up than running a cultivator through, but once it's down, it keeps working on its own for weeks, blocking light, holding moisture, and starving out anything trying to sprout underneath it. It's not the main method across the big field crops. Corn and beans and hay don't get mulched. But on the produce side, where the profit per acre is higher and the crops are more delicate, it fills in exactly where hoeing would otherwise have to. Hand-hoeing is still standard practice on a huge share of Amish vegetable and produce operations. And this is the part that surprises outsiders the most. It's not one guy with a hoe walking a field alone. It's whole families out there. Children old enough to hold a tool are typically taught to hoe alongside their parents almost as soon as they can walk a straight row. Not as punishment, but because that's simply how the work gets done. The same way it's been done in that family for generations. A single afternoon might have 6 or 8 people spread across one field, each one working a section, moving down the row in a rhythm that looks almost choreographed after a few seasons of practice. The sound of it carries across a field like this in a way a diesel engine never does. Metal blades chipping into dry soil, one after another, a rhythm you can hear from the road, and underneath it, the low murmur of a family talking through whatever families talk through on a long afternoon. It's hot, repetitive, and by evening it leaves blisters on hands that will be back out there doing the same thing tomorrow. Nobody's romanticizing that part. But it does something a spray rig never can. Every weed that gets pulled by hand gets pulled by root, on site, by someone who knows the difference between a crop seedling and a weed at a glance, in the exact narrow strip a cultivator blade has to leave alone to avoid killing the plant next to it. That strip, just a few inches around the base of every single plant in the field, is the one place mechanical weed control simply cannot reach. A hand and a hoe can. And when one family's fields need more hands than one family has, that's when it stops being a household chore and becomes something closer to a barn raising for weeds. Amish communities are built around mutual aid in a way most modern farms simply aren't. If a family falls behind, if illness or a bad planting season leaves a field getting away from them, neighbours show up. A work frolic, some communities call it, though the exact term and the exact rhythm of it shifts from settlement to settlement. A dozen or more people in a field that would have taken one family a week cleared in an afternoon. No wages change hands. The debt gets repaid the same way it was created, by showing up when someone else needs the same favour, sometime later that same season or the next. That's a different economic model than almost any commercial farm is built on. And it's the real reason the scale problem stops being a problem at all. A conventional operation trying to hand-weed 1,000 acres would need to hire a crew, and hired labour costs money, whether the weeds are bad that year or not. An Amish settlement doesn't hire that labour, it already has it, spread across every household in the district, and it gets deployed to wherever the need is biggest that week. One family's onions get overrun while their youngest is sick, the field next door sends help without being asked twice. The cost isn't paid in dollars, it's paid in showing up. Multiply that pattern across dozens of farms inside one settlement, and the math that seemed impossible at the start actually starts to work. 1,000 acres isn't one farmer's problem, it's the combined output of an entire community that rotates labour across every field the same way it rotates crops across every season. There's one more layer to this that most videos on this topic skip entirely, and it's arguably the most important one. It's not a tool or a technique at all. It's the scale of the fields themselves. A commercial operation running a few hundred acres of a single crop, corn, from fence line to fence line, is a monoculture, and monocultures are a weed's dream. Same soil chemistry, same light pattern, same competition, year after year, field after field. The weeds that are good at exploiting that one specific environment win, over and over, and they win bigger every season. Amish farms almost never look like that. Because horses limit how much ground one team can cover in a day, fields tend to stay smaller, and farms tend to run a genuine mix of crops side by side, corn next to hay, next to a vegetable plot, next to pasture. That patchwork breaks up the weed pressure before it ever gets the chance to concentrate. A weed that thrives in a corn row hits a hayfield 20 feet away and simply can't compete there. The diversity itself is doing weed control, quietly, in the background, every single day of the season, without anyone lifting a hoe. So when you put it all together, the rotation that starves weeds before they get comfortable, the stale seedbed that kills the first flush before the crop's even planted, the horse-drawn cultivators threading the rows all season, the hands closing the gap the machines can't reach, and the community labour system that turns one overwhelmed family's field into an afternoon's work for 30 people. That's how 1,000 acres stays clean with no chemical drum ever leaving the shed. It's slower than spraying, nobody's pretending otherwise. A crop duster can cover what an Amish community covers in a season in about an hour. But slower isn't the same as worse. And there's a reason a growing number of non-Amish farmers, the ones dealing with herbicide-resistant weeds that no longer respond to anything in the tank, have started driving past those clean, chemical-free fields and asking the same question you probably are right now. There's no single trick behind it. No secret spray hiding in a barn somewhere, no shortcut nobody's found yet. Just a system built from a dozen small habits: rotation, timing, a team of horses, a hoe passed from a parent's hand to a child's, and a community willing to show up in someone else's field before their own is even finished. Take away any one piece of that system, and the whole thing starts to lean. Take away the community part especially, and you're just left with a family trying to outwork 1,000 acres alone, which is exactly the math that doesn't work. If it takes this many hands, this much timing, and this much coordination to keep 1,000 acres clean without chemicals, what does that say about the fields that use them instead and just spray their way past the problem every single time?